The first thing on the agenda is to approve the meeting minutes of June 21st. Could I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Item number 2 and 3 on the agenda are items that we would typically take up at this meeting, but because of circumstances somewhat beyond our control, we're not going to be able to deal with them. But I would like to call on Chris Kinsley to bring us up to date on the status of PICO and the legislative budget request that we would normally do, and the reasons why we are planning to delay that. And also, secondly, if you would like to just go right on into it, the situation as it relates to the CITF situation. So, Chris.
Thank you very much, and I'll be glad to move forward. Of course, usually September marks the start of our legislative budget request process for both fixed capital outlay and for the operating budget, which we'll discuss in the next committee. The universities, of course, have submitted last month their capital improvement plans for new and renovated facilities, plus maintenance and renovation. Historically, the primary source for that has been PICO. Pursuant to statute, the Commissioner of Education provides the allocation for which each sector receives for PICO funding. So the Commissioner says, here's of the revenue estimate for PICO, here's how much K-12 receives, here's how much the college system receives, here's how much the universities receives, and then there's other minor entities, School for Deaf and Blind, Public Broadcasting, Division of Blind Services. And that's all by a formula, but the Commissioner administers the PICO trust funds. The situation is, however, that currently the Department of Education is projecting that there'll be a deficit in 13-14 in PICO. Because there's a deficit in PICO, all the additional cash that's projected for the trust fund is going to go to plug that deficit to ensure that the state's credit remains AAA, that we have a sufficient funds to pay the PICO debt service. As we discussed yesterday at the Facilities Task Force, the state of Florida has significant amounts of outstanding PICO debt for all the facilities that have been constructed K through 20 over the many years. We currently are under a 16% withholding on PICO disbursements for old projects that the legislature has appropriated, but there's not enough funding to cover all the projects, so we're under withholding. So it's really not a surprise that the Department of Education has reached that conclusion. So that's a long explanation to say with regards to PICO, our official allocation, which we received yesterday, is zero. That's zero for new projects, zero for maintenance, zero for sum of digits maintenance. That's zero for college system as well. That's zero for K-12, including the charter schools. The only thing in the recommendation of the commissioner, which will go to state board, is that there'll be $1 million or so for life safety issues at the School for Deaf and Blind and for the university lab schools, which don't have any tax base to support their operations. A sum total of about $5 million. And again, for those entities. And of course, the state board will take whatever action they feel is appropriate. I think their meeting to take up the budget is in October. But this is unprecedented. We talk a lot of times that there's no PICO, but we sort of take for granted there'll be PICO maintenance. That's almost a given. And this is true, no doubt about it, zero PICO. So it just emphasizes again how critical the work is of the task force. If I may, then I'd like to move forward to discuss the CITF.
Well, and of course, if this changes between now and the next meeting, we'll be discussing it again, right?
Yes, certainly. There's still, by law, there'll be at least another 2 PICO estimating conferences. So if the PICO estimate for some reason goes up, if things change such that there's not a deficit in the trust fund, perhaps we'll get an allocation, for the board to act upon and just recommend an LBR from.
Okay.
So certainly that will change. If I may, I'll move forward into the Capital Improvement Trust Fund projects.
Please.
The board approved an increase to the capital improvement fee, which had not been previously allowed back in June. I think 9 of the schools requested a $2 increase. New College requested somewhat less. FSU didn't request an increase. The result of that increase, plus we did a bond refunding, we paid off some old bonds, provided that we would have, my estimate was about $140 million, and it might have been a little more for capital improvement projects, which are approved by the students, and I think we had some examples of the type of projects the students were considering in our June meeting. The next step in the process, following the fee increase, was for the Division of Bond Finance to confirm my capacity estimate, so we could build our budget around estimated bond capacity plus a cash portion. Historically, the program has always sort of been a 50-50 program. We've done 50% bonds, 50% cash. We keep the coverages very high, so we make sure that we keep a strong credit. It's currently a AA credit, and the program's been around, I think, longer than PICO. I think it's been around 50 years, and it's a pretty vanilla program, if I have to say. So where we are at now, though, is the capacity is there, even at very high numbers. We have good coverage numbers. But Bond Finance wants to make sure at the end of the process, assuming this board approved the capital improvement projects and associated revenues, assuming the legislature appropriated it, and assuming there was no vetoes, at the end of the day, the State Board of Administration still has to authorize the bonds. And Bond Finance wants to make 100% sure that that's going to happen, rather than go through this elaborate process only to end up with problems. I think that's a valid concern. As I mentioned yesterday at the task force, the college system program, which is equivalent to ours, there were questions raised last year, and the college system was not authorized to do the full amount of bonding that they could have done, and they were authorized to do a smaller portion. And as President Benz reported yesterday, the governor's office is going to look at their debt policy October 2nd. That's what we're told. So I think with that in mind, Bond Finance did not recommend we move forward with a capacity number until we know for sure that there's a comfort level that at the end of the day, after going through the process, the bonds will be let as they usually would be. So that's where we stand with CITF. I just want to make sure everyone understands. The program is solid. The revenues are solid. My estimate is with the fee increase, revenues will go up from $40 million a year to about $50 million a year. Annual debt service is roughly, it was 28, it's dropping to I think 26 because we paid off some bonds. The following year it will drop to 24. So we're in a situation where debt service is dropping and revenues are increasing, rates are low, we have a great credit. From a finance perspective, and we have great student needs, as we've heard emphasized. I think the program is solid. My hope is that this message of what a great program this is can be effectively communicated by this board, by the chancellor, and that we get the green light to move forward, at least just with the process, and then let's see what happens. And that's my report on CITF.
Well, and so, Chris, my assumption is that you'll stay in touch with the governor's office and the Division of Bond Finance until they come to grips with a decision, and then you'll get back to this board and bring us up to date and keep us in the loop.
Yes,
and then
yes,
hopefully next meeting we can proceed with some of this.
Yes, hopefully then we can improve the entire capital budget. There's also some minor issues, back of bill items, and those minor things. We still have Cortellis on the books, and we still have to move Cortellis. But my recommendation would be at this point to defer the entire budget until we can act upon it again, hopefully at our November meeting.
Okay, great. So any questions by the board, by the committee? Okay, fine. Well, the next item on our agenda, did I see Charlie Edwards here? He's here. Thank you, sir. Well, it's a great deal of pleasure that Gulf Coast University in the past has named some of their buildings for people in the state that have been instrumental in the education system and the university system in Florida. And they have come to us and asked us if we would go ahead and approve the naming of Building 5 at Gulf Coast University for our past board member, Charlie Edwards. And many of you know, or may not know, I served with Charlie on the old Board of Regents way back when, and certainly served for when he was chairman of the Facilities Committee at the Board of Governors. And Charlie's been involved in the university system and universities themselves for the last 20 or 30 years. And I would like to ask Charlie and the Florida Gulf Coast University officials if they would like to come forward, and eventually our board needs to approve this, which is somewhat unusual because Charlie still serves on the University of Florida board. And so for that reason, this comes before us, but I'm just pleased that it does, because we get to be involved in this great thing. So, President.
Governor Beard, this is a very special day for Florida Gulf Coast University, and it's made even more special that you can take action on our request here on this campus. Many of you have been around for a long time, even before Florida Gulf Coast University existed. You all will recall that Charlie Edwards has been instrumental in the evolution of certainly the concept and then what you see around you now. And we are so pleased to come forward and properly recognize and honor Charlie's contribution to the success of Florida Gulf Coast University. Edwards Hall will be among other buildings that have been named for people who've made significant contributions to the evolution of Florida Gulf Coast University, including buildings named for past two presidents, and Tommy Howard and Howard Hall, and Reed Hall and Griffin Hall. So Edward Hall will be among some buildings that have names of people who have been very special to the growth and the development and the success of Florida Gulf Coast University. Charlie's here today, and never at a loss for words, but I'll tell you, I'm so pleased when I walked in this morning to see that he and his wife Sass could be here. So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd like to turn the mic over to Charlie Edwards to say a few words. And again, I want you all here to know how special it is for us to be a part of this today. Thank you.
I am a little bit speechless. I will say that you thought you all were through with me and you didn't have to listen to me anymore, but unfortunately, one more time. It is a great honor for me to accept this honor. On behalf of my wife, Sass, please stand. For 48 years, we've been without her help, obviously, we wouldn't be here today. Charlie Reed told me when we were just about to succeed with the Florida Gulf Coast formation that he had never seen an area work together any more than Southwest Florida did to get Florida Gulf Coast here. And I think that's very true. We had farmers from Moorhaven and Glades County and LaBelle with the cowboy boots on, sitting next to billionaires from Naples. It was an amazing come together of an area. It didn't stop when the university was obtained. If you look around, you will see a lot of buildings here, most of which were paid for by private funding from individuals in this area. It is an honor for me again. Thank you very much. I accept this not only on my behalf and my family's behalf, but also primarily on the behalf of all of those people from Southwest Florida who worked so hard to make this happen. And I will just get off the subject for a minute. I listened to Chris's report, and I think when Dick Beard and I first talked as I was leaving and he was becoming the new chairman, my comment was, I don't envy you. I'm not as concerned on the educational side as probably I should be. I think our system is fortunate in that we have some phenomenal people within the system, starting at the top, going down through the faculty and to the students. In tough economic times, we have survived before, and I think because of the quality of these people, we'll survive again. But what does concern me is the fact that we have, what, Chris, approximately $5 billion worth of physical plant as part of our system, and we have no money to maintain it. That does not add up, ladies and gentlemen. It does not add up. And if we continue at this rate, we're going to have an unbelievable problem. I know you had a workshop yesterday working on this, and Dick, I wish that I had an answer for you. If I did, I'd certainly tell you. But I am very concerned, and I think all of us should make it clear everywhere we go that this is a problem, and it's a problem not for one university, but for everything. And particularly when you realize the citizens of our state have put $5 billion into this, and we have no money to maintain it. With that, I'm going to get back to a positive side. Thank you very much. Welcome to Southwest Florida. And isn't it amazing what Brad and others have done here? This was a cow pasture a few years ago.
No, that's a fact. Charlie, thank you so much. And I'll commit to you that this facilities committee and the task force that we put together, we're going to do everything we can to find a solution so that we can get through the interim, and hopefully we can find state funds in the future that'll replace PICO or subsidize PICO. But if we don't, we've got to figure out a way to continue on, and particularly to maintain these buildings. But thanks for those comments. We need a motion. I'd like to have a motion to rename Academic 5 at Gulf Coast University for Charlie Edwards.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Pressure's
Unanimous.
off, Charlie.
Thank you,
I thought I
Charlie.
was going to die for lack of a second.
Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is also relates to Florida Gulf Coast University. Florida Gulf Coast University has asked for a approval of this committee to authorize bonds to finance a student residence facility here on the university. And Chris, could you walk us through that proposal, please?
Sure, I'm very glad to do that. What's proposed is a $30 million traditional bond deal for Florida Gulf Coast. This would be the 13th dorm at the university, and this will be for 520 beds. One of the things that I'm very glad the meeting is at Gulf Coast is I think sometimes there's a question. Gulf Coast does house a significantly greater percentage of its students on campus than our typical university. Part of that is how Gulf Coast was set up to begin with. I think also, as you see the local area, as Charlie Edwards alluded to, there is a lot of private development around. And just literally, you don't see the typical student-type complexes all around the campus because either it's wetlands or it's, very nice residential communities. They're not really affordable for students, in all honesty. So I think by seeing what's around the university, you can see what drives demand. Their occupancy is always high. They just brought a new dorm online, I believe, this fall. It's already filled up, and there's a waiting list. Their enrollment continues to grow. I think it's around this fall, it was up about 8%. So I think the deal itself, it makes The coverages are strong. They exceed the 120 cover that's required by the debt guidelines. There's no unusual features to the debt. I'd be glad to take any questions on the project.
Are there any questions? Could I have a motion to approve Florida Gulf Coast University's proposal to issue debt to finance the student housing, please?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes. Item 6 on our agenda is an update for our facilities task force. Judy had a meeting yesterday. It was very well attended and a very productive meeting, I thought. And President Bentz, would you like to give us an update, please?
It'd be my pleasure, Governor Beard. Our committee has been working hard. We have met again, like Governor Beard said yesterday, and what we have been doing is putting together putting together our draft report. I have one to show you. We have a draft report. We will not be late, and but we tore it apart yesterday and threw things away and made them high, medium, and low, and kicked the things around, the ideas around. What I've been doing also now is actively running some of the more interesting ideas up the flagpoles by decision makers and policy makers in Tallahassee. And I'm asking them what's dead on arrival, what has a pulse, what do they really like, and I'm getting feedback. I think the one thing that is surprising to me is the sense, it's not really surprising, the sense of urgency is there. You heard what Chris said, there is no PICO, everybody knows that. And in the short run, we have just a horrible problem with billions of dollars of facilities with no money to fix them or maintain them, and roofs that, I mean, we got 60 inches of rain in Pensacola this summer. So the point is that the sense of urgency is there, and they know, they meaning the decision makers, know something has to be done. We need some help. And so our sort of mantra is to find ways to help ourselves, not to go begging and asking for more state money and another source of money to replace PICO. What we're really asking for is flexibility. Flexibility with the money that we already have to relax rules and ways that we can use our money. So I've been meeting with Senator Gates, the governor's new chief of staff, Mr. Hollingsworth. Ben Watkins, had a long, productive meeting with Ben Watkins the other day, and I'm meeting tomorrow with Speaker Weatherford, Speaker Designating Weatherford. We are taken very seriously. Some of the things that we're talking about, I thought you probably might be curious about what we're really kicking around. For example, we talked about concurrency for the first time. As you know, there is no money for concurrency. And so one idea that came up, that out of several, but one that seems to have some traction that we're going to run up, is a pay-as-you-go proposal. When we had, instead of taking the master plan and going to the local counties and cities and saying, you know, what is it going to cost, what's our impact going to be, and we shell out the money ahead of time, well, a lot of these buildings don't ever get built. And they get built differently, or they get built smaller, but we don't get any money back. So we're proposing a pay-as-you-go, and to negotiate what the concurrency cost will be when we get ready in the planning process for a building, and then building that into the cost of the building. And so we pay them as we go. And I thought that was pretty good. Some of it can be standardized, how many dollars per parking slot, and so on. And so that's a kind of interesting thing to do. And so we're going to run that up the flagpole and see how they like that. Another thing that we're talking about are different funding options. And the funding options that we are considering and talking about are perhaps a dedicated authority for higher education for bonds. Maybe university debt should not count against state debt. Perhaps universities should be authorized to issue some debt. New revenues. How about redirecting some revenues the state already collects to fill that this $250 million a year gap? The capital improvement fee. A cost-effective mix of pay-as-you-go. And why don't we get the same as the colleges do? Instead of $2, why don't we get $10 instead of 10%? Why don't we get 20%? And they kind of listened to that and nodded their heads. What about a facility fee? Charging so much a semester hour for facilities. We're kind of the last ones in the state not to do that. So these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. And then there's the 10-10-62 issues. We want it changed a little bit. And one of the things that is really getting nice traction is expanding, relaxing, whatever you want to call it, the functional relationship requirement of funds. Parking has to pay for parking. If you have a surplus in housing, why can't you use it on something else? And so they're listening and saying, Mr. Watkins likes that pretty well. So I was pleased with that. Maybe eliminate the 5% restriction on the use of student activity and athletic fees. Why not that? He said, well, that might be able to work. So they're in the mindset, governors, of giving us some help. Basically, the attitude is one of a little bit of deregulation for us. I think if you wanted to bring it into one phrase, that's what we're doing. Spending our carry-forward balances on other things that we can't spend our carry-forward balances on now. And so that's the path we're going. We have a wonderful committee. We have a great set of advisors. We have a real good, what would you say? We don't have anything that's crazy. We have some ideas that are new and different. The P3 relationships, for example, and proposals, they're coming in with some good ideas. But I want to thank our task force staff. I really want to thank Chris Tinsley that's making this possible. You know who really does the work. Chris and Janice Skelly right now. And but we have a draft outline. Like I said, we are circulating the revised outline right away as soon as Janice and Chris go back to Tallahassee to the task force and the advisors. We're getting feedback. We will be able to have a final draft by mid-October. We'll look at it again, and we will give you a final report for your November packet. And so it will be complete for your November board meeting to kick around, to talk about. And you put a great group together, and I am honored to be the humble leader.
Thank you, President Betts. You know, once we get the report, then the real work happens.
Yes.
And we've got to make what they're recommending in the report become a reality of this system. And it looks to me like, given where we are with the financing and where we are with the legislature and the governor, that we're going to have to become more self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And each institution is going to have to figure out a way to pay for the facilities and these things without very much help from the state in the way of revenue. So we're not the first state that's gone through this. You've studied many states around the country and gotten some of their best ideas, and I appreciate you doing that.
Yes,
and so,
we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
That's right.
Right.
That's exactly
Thank
right.
you, sir.
So thank you so much for your job on this, and I'm confident that it'll give us the basic framework for us to go try to attack Charlie Edwards' problem and the system's problem. I'd like to, the next item on our agenda is basically, we included in here the committee work plan. I'd like for each member of the committee to take a look at that and get with Chris if you see any issues in that work plan that worry you, and then we'll put it to bed, I guess, at the next meeting. Is that right, Chris?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, the final thing on our board committee meeting is there's been a change at FAMU on the housing project that we approved last March. And I thought it was a significant enough change that I wanted this board to be aware of what's going on and understand where we are with it. And I'd like to call on Chris to help us with that explanation, and also President President Robinson. I think you've got Sam Houston here to
Yes,
give us a presentation.
Yeah, I have Mr. Sam Houston, the Director of our Facilities Planning and Construction, and Dwayne Jackson, External Architectural Consultant, who will give you the brief update.
Fine. So Chris, why don't you start, and then we'll do the update. And this is really for information purposes only. I want you all to understand what's going on, and we'll go from there.
Okay, just for a little bit of background, this committee approved the bonds for the housing bed, 800-bed housing project in February. The full board approved it in March at the March committee meeting. The governor cabinet authorized sale of the bonds, I believe, in early May, and the bonds were actually sold, I think, the end of June, proceeds delivered in July. They had a good rating, and they got a great rate, and I think I sent an email, as I usually do, to all the board members, as we would for any deal. We had consulted extensively with FAMU early in the process. I know Chair Baird, we met with FAMU officials early in January, primarily because we try to do that on most projects, but also because this was the largest dorm that FAMU had attempted before, and because they had not constructed a new dorm in many years, and they had certainly had great need. They had done a renovation project a few years previously, but new is different than renovate. It was a design-build project. Everything seemed to be fine, and it was somewhat of a surprise when the trustees decided that the design-build firm was not going to be able to deliver the project that had been contemplated, that the price had gone from an approximation of $35 million, and Sam can give the details, to $48 million, with some concerns about could the schedule be met. And at this point, board staff are really not so much looking backwards, say, what happened on the process, but we're assisting the university. The project has been put out for bid. It will be advertised tomorrow in Florida Administrative Weekly. It's going to be put out for straight, competitive, hard bid. We put in, I think, a very good set of qualifications. We're working with the architect who did the 100% drawings, and I think we'll know within a matter of a month or so what the bid price is. We have the bond proceeds. Work had started, and they're working to seal up the project to make sure when the new contractor is on board, they can proceed with the project. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to Sam and Dwayne, is the first concern is from a finance guy is, okay, what happens to debt service? We've looked at this, and next year when the dorm was supposed to come online, FAMU will be able to cover debt service from existing housing funds and from the revenues they have, even at a reduced occupancy rate. Is it going to be great? It's not going to be great. Coverage is going to be tight. It's basically a 1.0 coverage for next fall. Then the dorm comes online in fall 14, and coverage, of course, gets better immediately. But we are doing everything possible. We, the board, bond finance, advising FAMU to make sure that by no means do they have to tap the 1 year of debt service, full debt service, that was put aside as part of the bond deal. So there is a backstop, but our goal is not to even contemplate touching the backstop, to use existing reserves to finish the project, to not have to value engineer it, and to get it built to good quality and for a good price. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Sam Houston and Dwayne.
Can I ask a question? You said something that we're not interested to look to back and look to the future. I am interested, because the future, it depends on this type of projects and others. So I am very interested to know how this whole process failed. Basically, the Board of Trustees failed to select a company that can deliver. So I like to get a report back, Dr. Robinson, and see what process, how the process, I'm not interested to put a blame on anybody. All I'm looking for is that to look at the process, what has happened, and that what has been put in place that doesn't happen again. So if you could just either at later date give us a report on it, or and tell us that what happened and what measures has been put in place, and that this type of thing doesn't happen again.
Okay, thank you, Governor Hussaini. Actually, our board, at the same time it made this decision, asked us to take a look at this through our VP for Audit and Compliance, and he's working on a report, and we'll make sure that we share that with you.
So we're gonna get it through the audit process that
Yes.
on that, okay, thank you.
I think all Chris was saying is, right now, we're working on trying to make sure this thing goes forward, and we get the thing bid and budgeted, and we'll worry about what happened next month or later, And let me mention a couple other things. I personally went and looked at the facilities at FAMU. I was worried from the day one about the budget, not the budget so much, but about the schedule. And so this board and FAMU agreed to hire a third-party construction management consultant that's on board. He's here. And so we've got somebody not associated with the old contractor or the architect, that's an independent entity looking at all this, that's been on board, and because of our actions is on board. And we also asked this contractor to have a very significant penalty in the contract if he didn't meet the schedules. And, I don't know if that's a problem, had been a problem, but it was in place. So he was under the gun to get this thing done on time. So with that, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Sam Houston. I'm the Director of Facility Planning and Construction at Florida A&M University. And I would like to give you just a brief update of where we are on the project. Like Chris said, we terminated the contract with the current developer after he came in 37% over our budget. Since then, we have been working with both Bond Finance, Board of Governors Office, and our external consultants since mid-August to get this project started again. Currently, we have an advertising out in the Florida Administrative Weekly to bid this project with some pre-qualifications associated with it. We would have a pre-mandatory bid on pre-mandatory meeting on October the 2nd with all of the bidders. We would expect to get bids on the 23rd. After evaluating those bids, we should be able to enter into a contract by November 1 to move the project forward. This project, the intent is that we would have the project ready and completed by April of 2014. And I'll be pleased to answer any question that the board would have.
Right. Are there any questions from the board? Norman?
Have you gotten any preliminary estimates about what the project should come in for? I hear you talking about new bids. Have you reached the conclusion that somebody out there can build it for the budget that you put out? Or are we still going to be questionable about what the real cost of the project will be?
I think that we are confident that the $40 million budget that we have out as the cost of the project that we're getting within that budget, that budget is kind of consistent with other universities' costs for housing. I think we identified probably about a $50,000 bed, and I think other universities building within those guidelines.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Over here. Yes, sir.
You may have responded to the question, and I just missed it. So did you say, because I thought you responded to Norm's question by saying that we seem to be within the same guidelines as what we find on other campuses. My question is a little bit different in that, and please forgive me if you've already responded to this, but have we, as the university, have we done our cost estimate, and do we know what it and do we know what we believe it should cost, so that when we receive these bids, we know that it is within range?
Yes, I think that's why we increased the budget to $40 million on the project. The other contractor had given us a fairly low cost for the project, and they, as the design build, as part of their contract, is to guarantee a cost for the project. And when they bidded it out, they gave us a budget like 37% over what they had agreed to build these facilities for.
Okay.
I have a quick one, and maybe this is for Chris. Is it typical to sell bonds prior to having a contract in place? Or, I mean, is there something in this process that we went too fast before we had a contract in place to build this building?
Mr. Chair, it is typical to sell the bonds when the contract is imminent. Sometimes it's, the award has gone out, and in a design build case, perhaps the contract is not yet signed. A lot of times the university won't commit and sign the contract till they know the bonds have been sold. And so but usually the contract is written, the ink is dry, it's just waiting signature. And especially sometimes now if it's a hard bid situation, parking and housing typically, and I'm not the expert on this, but parking and housing, the costs are usually fairly well established. Our institutions have, like a Gulf Coast, they know to within a fairly tight tolerance what the costs are going to come in at, and they've already gone through the procurement bid process. The cost might be a little lower. Of course, we never report that, but that's very typical. It comes in, maybe $1 million or $2 million under budget. It might be $1 million or $2 million over budget. To be over, by $10 or $12 million is unprecedented on a design build. As Sam said, that's what the design builder does. They're the architect and they're the builder. They say, the university says, here's our budget, and they say, yes, we can build it. Here's our design within that budget, or we can't. The thing unusual here is that when they went to the subs, they couldn't get the bids to fit within that. And we cannot absolutely say, neither FAMU, no one can say what the project is absolutely going to cost until the bids are received. FAMU has looked at the drawings, we've had the outside architect look at it, our architect has looked at the drawings, we've had some other architects look at the drawings. We believe $40 million is a reasonable place for a bid. We wouldn't recommend putting it out for a bid if we thought there was, all the bids were kind of coming high. Until those bids come in, I cannot say with absolute assurance that the project can be built for that budget. That's the nature of the bid process. In some ways, I wish this meeting was, a month from now, and I could say, yes, I think to Governor Hussaini's question, that will answer a lot of questions when we see what another contractor or contractors are willing to bid on the project. I mean, that's going to be critical. So,
Chris, if I might, Mr.
yes.
Chairman?
Let me answer one thing first, and then Frank, I'd like to call on you. But we just approved a $30 million bond issue, and the cost of that project was $49,000 per bid, plus a little bit. And what we're talking about here is $50 a bid. So my guess is that what they're expecting is a reasonable expectation at this point in time, and the numbers seem to work. But like we said, we won't know till the bids are in. Go ahead, Frank.
Yes, sir. Well, you've pretty much said what I was just about to say. When the bids do come in, they're either going to support or not support the amount of money that has now been put on the table.
Right.
I think, and we do want to find out more about all of this, not just as it relates to FAMU, but the entire process that we use for all of these projects. Because what we had here was, I'll use the word, it was rather unprecedented to have a builder come in literally at the 11th hour after the pad had been poured and say, oh, by the way, we can't do this project for what we said we could do it for because we can't get the subs to come in to that range, so it is going to cost How much more? What was the difference? I can't remember, I don't want to give you a number.
$13.3.
$13 million more than was originally the bid price. And that goes back to the chairman's statement about, is it unusual to sell the bonds first? Almost in every case, that's not an issue because the contractor and the builder
You're
can do
confident.
the project for what
Yeah.
it was bid for. This was very different. The contractor had never built, to my knowledge, a residence hall before. And I think once the bid came in, found out it wasn't what they thought it was going to be, based on lack of experience, at least is my take. So it is important that we look at this issue, Governor Husseini, as how it relates to the whole process. But that's rather why we got here in the first place.
Can I make a comment? Mr. Chairman, this is a business that I am in, and I'm involved in all sorts of buildings. As a whole, design-build, it's a way of trying to save time. But the reality is, when the economy is down, you want to get a hard bid.
Yep.
That's the cheapest, the best way to construct. Now, today we sit here and we say, okay, $1 million here, $1 million there. $1 million can save a lot of students, being able to go to school. The best way of constructing is a hard bid, meaning you have to have full set of plans, and if you have a full set of plans, and if you have a capable staff that have all their acts together, then you hard bid it, and you will get a lower bid, especially when economy down. We're talking about millions. I'll give you about one building, this is about 2 years ago, that we got a design build, and when we finished the plan and hard bid it, it saved us from what the maximum guarantee was by $9 million. So this is not about FAMU. We're going to look at it, we're going to check it out, but it's about all our universities going forward, about the construction costs, what is it going to cost you, because the capital cost is one of the largest costs of our system.
Well, not to,
And you're,
yeah, I've built a lot of them too. Not to overstate this, but one of the big driving factors here was that they wanted to have this facility available to them in the fall of next year, I guess. And because they've got a housing crisis at FAMU. I mean, they've got dorms there that are in horrible shape, and many of them need to be torn down and done something else done with them. So I think that was driving this a little bit, and shame on us. Chris?
I think that's it. I know our architectural consultant had some additional information, but I don't know if that's the pleasure of the committee, or we just
No, I don't
had the
think so.
information.
This is more information only, and I appreciate y'all both coming before us and bringing us up to date, and I'm hopeful that the bids will be where we expect them to be.
We think the hard bid, I completely agree with Governor Husseini, who's
Yep.
as far, what I've learned, as I said to you, Mr. Beard, I have financed a lot of projects. I've never built a project. You've built, Governor Husseini has built, if Governor Rood was here, he has built projects, and we appreciate you offering your expertise on this, on the hard bid process, and it will be, I think it will go, but, it's like the farmer planting his crops. You just cannot absolutely say, until we know. I will continue to provide this board, and there's many other interested parties, including bond finance, regular updates, hopefully weekly updates, as the project progresses, and with your permission, we'll report this out again where we stand at the November committee meeting.
Okay, and if I think this board would love to know whether or not the bids come in on budget, whenever that happens.
And Mr. Chairman, just a fine point, I know it's already been mentioned, but we probably ought to end here. You had just said that one of the things that helped to drive this was the urgency to get this open this next August. That urgency has now been relieved. Now,
Yes.
it puts greater pressure on FAMU based on their current housing situation for a full another calendar year. But on the business side of this, it does buy us the time now
Yeah, to do it
between
right.
trying to do it by this next August and August hence to be able to make sure we do this right.
Yeah, I agree. Sure, Norman?
The one thing that I heard in here, and I hope at some point we address it, is it sounds to me like we didn't vet the contractor. We, A&M didn't. And if that's the case, we need to have some kind of guidelines about who we're dealing with and some background check that they have the ability to do what they're stepping up to do. And I think we might find that out when you report back. How well did we know the contractor and their ability to produce what they said they were going to produce?
We'll certainly note that, and like I said, I was not aware that FAMU was doing an investigation. My intent, I mean, there's only two of us to do this, was one, in the midst of some other, duties, the task force, et cetera. My intent all along, and I'd be requested by Chair Beard and Chair Carlson to look further into this, not investigation to see what happened, but, we first have to get the project
Started.
The project up, then look back and see, what were the process steps. It will certainly be helpful, I'm sure FAMU's audit staff will produce the report quickly, and we can use that to see, from the Board of Governors perspective, within the regulations, within university processes, is there improvements that could be made? Certainly, this is unprecedented. Let's see what can be done, if anything, to make sure this remains unprecedented and unique in system history.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for that update. I appreciate it, President Robinson, for your being here for this. Has anybody got anything else for this committee? If not, this committee is adjourned.